Hello, it's Q here, developer of ICMIZER. In this video today I'm going to talk about charts feature. Charts in ICMIZER can be a great complement to the usual result grid. For a wide variety of spots, those push-pull charts will help you make a more educated decision. Charts provide a quick way to play around with someone's range and see how changes in certain range will affect our decision. So instead of having to do it manually, you can hit the charts button and you will see all the work done for you. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's say that we are wondering at what point does shoving fives in this certain spot in 9 max sit and go would be negative, like how wide does he have to call us or how tight. So we are looking at the first spot, maybe he calls us with 41%, and we can see that fives are positive. We go to his range, edit big blind call range, make it a little bit tighter, hit calculate, still positive. So maybe it seems that if he's going to be tighter, it's going to be more and more positive. But we are not sure. Maybe there is a spot where it's still negative. We go to 58%, and we can see it's positive. And we widen up his calling range to 76%, it's still positive. So let's see 100%. It's still positive. Now, what I'm talking about when I say that we can see all the information immediately on the hand EV chart, let's go and have a look. Here we can see a hand EV chart for fives. Note that in hand EV chart, hero's hand is taken into account. So what's going on here? On the x-axis we have big blind calling range. And we can see that on the left it's where he is not calling us at all, like 0%, very tight. And on the right part we have him being very wide, where he calls us with an entire range. And we can see that immediately if he's very tight, on the y-axis we have hero EV of the shove for fives. We can see that if he's very tight, fives show the maximum EV. And as he becomes a little bit looser, the EV slowly decreases. Then it reaches the minimum at a certain point, like 70% of his calling range. And after that point, it actually goes up again. So if he's very wide, like 100%, it's much better for us than if he's only calling with 70%. So this is the hand EV chart for fives. And we can see clearly that no matter what he does, it's always plus EV. For some hands, EV is positive regardless of our opponent's range, and we call those hands or pushes unexploitable in those spots. Usually there are not too many hands like that, because it requires that the hand is pretty powerful. Now let's examine some other pretty strong hand, but we will see that pushing them is not unexploitable. Let's choose a hand which is Jack 10 suited and check the hand EV chart. Now what's going on? Again, if opponent is calling us very tight, we are making a lot of money just by winning this spot. 300 chips moves in our stack. That's a great result. So when he's not calling, it's a clear plus EV push. But at some point, and here we can see precisely that this point is at around 31% of big blind's calling range, our push becomes negative. And then it slowly goes down. But at some point, again, our EV starts to improve. And that is because Jack 10 suited is generally not a bad hand, and against some hands it performs very well. And we can see that if he is calling us wider than 83%, actually it's again becomes positive for us. So this is a certain type of shape where EV goes down, reaches 0, goes below 0, but then starts to go up, and sometimes it will reach 0 again and go up more than 0, become positive against wider rangers, and sometimes not. Here we have been discussing generally powerful hands, but let's see what are the shapes for most common hands, like weak hands. For example, let's see what will happen if we have 10-7 offsuit. In this case, chart it is a very typical shape. We can see again that if opponent is tight, we are making money from his tightness. Like if we know that he is not calling us wider than 21%, we are making a profitable push by shoving 10-7 offsuit. But if he's a little bit wider, then we can see that it becomes worse and worse. The wider he calls, the worse the EV, because generally 10-7 offsuit is a very poor hand. So here we should be pretty confident about our opponent's calling range if we were to push. And we can see that charts in this case allow us to quickly find this point where it becomes negative, and this is the power of hand EV chart. One of the rare shapes is one where EV of our hand increases as soon as our opponent loosens his range up, and this is usually true for really powerful hands like tens. We can see here that it starts with usual EV of 2%, around 2%, if opponent is tight, but as he loosens up, we can see that we are improving our equity of push. And this would be true for the most powerful hands like big pairs or ace-king suited. Hand EV chart should start to make some sense. We are basically finding dependency of EV for our hand from some opponent's range. Now let's see another spot where we are facing an all-in from the small blind and we are on the big blind. And let's say we are holding sevens. So let's look at the chart, and we can see that if our opponent is shoving tighter than 21%, calling with sevens is negative. But if he's wider, it's clearly positive. And this is immediately helpful. Please note that you are not limited to simple spots. I am showing two examples where we are pushing and we are calling all in, so there is only one range to edit. If a spot is more complex and there are more ranges involved, please let me show you that we can still find dependency of EV for our hand from any range we choose. Here I have a different spot. We are on the button with 2000 chips and we are thinking about pushing, and there are two players behind us who have bigger stacks, and we have assigned their calling ranges. And here we have set up a certain scenario for small blind versus big blind. We can see that for some reason big blind is going to call 33%, with 33% of hands, and we would like to see how EV of our push for eights will depend on small blind's pushing range in this spot. So we hit the charts button, and now we can see that it allows us to select a range which we would like to find dependency of EV of our hand. And we would like to see how EV of our hand will depend on the small blind pushing range. So we select small blind pushing range, and we can see the chart. And let me tell you what's going on here. We can see that if small blind is not pushing wider than 70%, shoving eights is positive. But if he is shoving wider than 70%, for example, 85% or any two, it becomes more a better decision to fold eights and just see how he will collide with a big blind, probably some of them busts, and that will increase our tournament equity. So that makes eights a fold. So this should be curious, and you can see that we can find dependency against any range. So I hope hand EV chart makes sense. It will be the most helpful for heads-up players or for small blind versus big blind scenarios, I believe. But you can also use it for any other spot where you want to see this kind of dependency. Now, the next type of chart available in ICMIZER is range chart. And when we are building a range chart, hero hand is not taken into account anymore, so it is ignored. So here I have a spot, a small blind is pushing, and we are in the big blind. And we are building a range chart, and let me explain to you what's going on the chart. On the x-axis we have small blind's pushing range, and it goes again from 0 to 100% to any two. And on the y-axis we have the hero response plus EV range. We can see that there are three green values here. The lightest green would be the 0 plus EV range, and the darker green would be more. We'll have only hands which are, for example, darkest green would be hands which have plus 0.5% difference between EV push and EV fold. So we can see if our opponent would be pushing 100% of hands, then we would be only able to call him with 0 EV with 34% of hands. Let me show you what this means. So if he is pushing 100% of hands, we would see that we can call, as I said, with 34% of hands. And the range chart, again, provides you a quick access to all hero response ranges against all potential opponent ranges. We can see that in this call-in spot where we are calling an all-in, the chart for range chart has this triangle shape, and it will be usually the case. Call spots pretty much always have this triangle shape, and we can see that the important thing here is the ratio of opponent's pushing range to our calling range. To find the ratio, look at the 100% spot and see how wide hero can call. We can see that hero can call with 34% hands, and if we divide 34 by 100, we will see that it is 1/3 of hands. So this 1/3 is the fraction. So we can see if opponent is pushing 50% of hands, we can call with 15%, which is pretty much 1/3, and this is guaranteed by triangle shape. How you can use this? We can see that in the ICM pressuring examples, this fraction will be usually smaller than in simpler scenarios. For example, in GPV mode, we will see that range EV chart will have a much bigger fraction. So we can call him if he pushes 100%. If spot was just GPV and winner take all scenario, we could call him with 64%. So this fraction would be 2/3. And we can see that if he would be pushing 50%, we would be calling with 31% of hands, which is also 2/3 of his pushing range. So this was a range chart for a spot where hero is facing a shove. Now let's look at the range chart for a spot where hero is pushing himself. Here we have a scenario where hero is on a small blind and he is pushing into the big blind. And let's look at the range chart. Range chart has different shape. It's not a triangle shape anymore. And let me explain what's going on. If our opponent is not calling us wide enough, for example, here we can see that if he is calling us with less than 25% of hands, we can basically push any two. Fold equity is simply too good here. He's just not calling often enough, so we can push any two, any hand, and that will make immediate profit for us. But we can see that at some point, and the point is exactly roughly around opponent range of 26%, we can see a big drop in the hero range, and it drops dramatically from 100% to 33% of hands pretty quick. So if opponent is calling 25, we can see that hero can push 95% of hands, but if he's calling at 32, we can only push 47% of hands, and if he calls 37, we can now only push 35% of hands. So it reached a certain level where our pushing range is just too powerful, so it just contains powerful hands, so regardless of opponent calling range, it doesn't change too much. So this is a common shape for pushing spots. It pretty much always starts with plus EV push against tight ranges, and then it drops. And what's curious here is that sometimes this area where the range of hero becomes much narrower than open push against tight call range could be falling exactly in the area where you expect your opponent to be in certain tournament spots. So in this kind of scenario, it's quite likely that your opponent wouldn't be calling with 19% of hands where you should be pushing 100%, but he is actually between this and something like this. So if you guess wrong, you would be making a negative push. So that is a curious part of estimating your opponent's range. And you can see that the problem of that spot clearly on the range chart. Such fast drop, if you see such fast drop in hero range, like from 100% to 33% of hands, you know that you have something to think about. And again, if we were in GPV spot, it wouldn't be so bad. We can see that in GPV spot, opponent could be calling with 29% of hands, and we would still be pushing 100% of hands. And if he wasn't calling us so tight, we would be able to push still pretty wide if he was calling us with 57% of hands, we would be able to push 51% of hands. And that wasn't the case when we were pressured by ICM. And again, with range chart, we aren't limited only to simple spots. If the spot is a little bit more complex, like here, from the example with hand AV chart, we can also build a range chart and find our range dependency from the small blind pushing range. And let's look at it. We can see pretty curious shapes, so let me explain. If small blind is not pushing very wide, for example, here we can see that on the x-axis is small blind pushing range. If he's not pushing wide here, for example, if he's pushing only 22% of hands, we can see that hero can push 72% of hands. But as our opponents, as small blind's pushing range becomes wider, we can see that we are becoming tighter actually, because it makes more sense for us to fold. And again, if opponent is particularly aggressive, so he is pushing 100% of hands, we can see that in this kind of situation it would only make sense to push the most powerful hands like jacks, ace queen suited, and ace king offsuit. So this was the range chart, and hopefully it makes sense. And this is the video, and I hope you enjoyed it and you will like it. Thank you.